Welcome, friends. Welcome back to the kitchen. Welcome back to Sunday morning in the Old Cookbook Show. Today we're going to do a recipe out of this cookbook sent in by a viewer. Thank you very much. The Battersea Polytechnic Training Department of Domestic Science Household Cookery Recipes. Now, undated. I had to track down Battersea Polytechnic when this book was published. 1914, first edition. Battersea Polytechnic was a polytechnic or a college in London. Somehow over the years it's morphed into the University of Surrey, not in London. Combed through their archives and found that this is a first edition from 1914, and it's a teaching textbook type cookbook. But apparently, over the years, this cookbook has had a life outside of the university teaching environment and became one of those cookbooks in the area that everybody bought and used. And of note, in the mid-1970s, an edition of this cookbook was the first English cookbook to embrace metric and the switch from pounds and ounces to metric. It's a very interesting cookbook for a bunch of different reasons, and we'll talk about a couple of them as we get there. We're going to make something I've never made before called a rough robin cake. As much as I looked up this book to get a little bit more information about the book, I have looked up nothing about a rough robin cake. Never heard of it before, have no idea what I'm getting into. The cake starts out very interestingly using what would today be called a reverse creaming method. And so what that means, instead of creaming together the fat and the sugar, we're going to cream together the fat and the flour first. So we'll get the fat in there and we'll start creaming that together. So today we would call this the reverse creaming method, and typically you would put the fat into a bowl of the flour and sort of rub it together with your hands and rub it together. What this does is it coats the flour with the fat so that when we add the liquid later, there's less chance of any gluten forming because the fat is completely surrounding all of the flour, doesn't allow the water in the same way. In this case, milk, but milk is mostly water, which is supposed to give you a much more tender cake. And we put that to the test a while back. We did 3 different cake methods, probably 2 or 3 years ago now. Anyway, the recipe calls for dripping. I've used lard. In this time period, dripping could have meant pork dripping, beef dripping. It could have meant bacon fat, whatever sort of fat you had in your kitchen. Okay, so the flour and the fat mixed together. In goes, well, sugar, white sugar, baking powder, and ground rice, or as we would call it today, rice flour. This addition of rice flour in a cookbook in 1914 speaks to a time period where we're about to see change in English cookery. And when I say English cookery, I mean the greater English cookery of England, Scotland, Wales. Prior to this time period, rice flour was used extensively, and I have a pile of cookbooks, going back into the 1700s, where rice flour is used in a lot of cookbooks that are meant for people in a lower socioeconomic strata, because rice flour was super cheap, and they would cut the regular flour with rice flour, and then to make it cheap, and then they found that it actually made a lot of cooking a better texture. And one example of that is Scottish shortbread. I have Scottish shortbread recipes in cookbooks in 1700s that are 100% rice flour. Rice flour was super available and super cheap at that time period. It was supplanted shortly after this book was published by the next cheapest flour that did exactly or pretty much exactly the same thing, which is corn flour, or as we would call it here in Canada and the United States, cornstarch. And so it'd be interesting to see if I could find a later edition of this cookbook, and if the rough robin cake still is in the cookbook, did it switch to corn flour? And if it didn't switch to corn flour, did it just switch to all regular flour and leave the corn flour component out or the rice flour component out? I don't know. I have to look that up. I have to find a later copy of this book now to sort of explore that. In other cookbooks that I have that sort of straddle this time period, the switch from rice flour went to corn flour or completely back to regular flour. Now, next ingredients in are the fruits. The recipe calls for currants, which are a type of raisin, actual raisins, which are a type of raisin, and peel, and I really like the electric colored peel. So I'm going to toss these in. I really want to give the whole spiel on currants, but I know that I do it every time, and I'm not going to do it. And even when I do it, people still can't grasp that you can have two things called a similar name that are completely different in English, because English is all about confusing you. Okay, so all of that goes in, and I'm going to put the mixer on. It just says milk to mix. So put the mixer on and start pouring in the milk until we get a batter. It says to mix to a light dough with the milk. So I think that looks pretty good. Let's give that a go. So there's no information about pan size or oven temperature. Bake 3/4 to 1 hour in a flat tin. Flat tin. Could be a 9x9. I don't know which one to use. You take it as vague. I mean, it is very vague, but it also allows you, the baker at home, to choose the size of tin or just use the tin that you have. And I'm almost thinking a 9x9. I'm going to prep a 9x9. Okay, 9x9, and batter goes in. Okay, no egg, no flavoring, not much sugar. It is a product of its time period. It's going to be a very interesting cake. Now, I really like that it doesn't give a container size. Makes me think. Makes me wonder exactly what it wanted. It also means that, you know, because recipes were more descriptive and not prescriptive, people didn't feel the need to handhold and control what you did at home at that point. They understood that you were working within the parameters of stuff that you owned. You just weren't going to shoot out to the store and buy a different size pan because you're trying a new recipe, which is kind of the norm today. People will tell you in their cookbooks that you have to have this kind of pan, or you need to find this kind of special sugar that's only grown in this, and and it just gets ridiculous. Also, there's no hand holding. You're left to discover on your own how to make it, really, which I think is interesting. And a lot of people say, well, that's just because in the past everyone knew how to cook. Well, if everyone knew how to cook, there'd be no need for a cookbook. And there'd certainly be no need for a cookbook that has recipes in it on how to make tea or how to make toast. It would seem fairly apparent that anyone could take a slice of bread and make toast, and yet there are recipes for toast. So, into an oven that I have arbitrarily set at 350 degrees, because that sounds good, and I'll start looking at it in about 3/4 of an hour.
Hurrah, it's time for cake!
There you go, Jules.
Hey friends. Hey Glenn.
So, this is a rough robin cake. I've done zero research. Even after it baked, I resisted the urge to go and research it. I didn't want to know anything about it. I just wanted to make
Is it like a tea biscuit with currants and peel?
Exactly.
Okay, that's what it looks like.
It is exactly that.
Oh, that's what it tastes like.
Oh, okay. So,
No joking.
recently, I don't know if these videos have come out yet. They're coming out yet. We filmed them. I don't know what the schedule is. Recently, we did a cream biscuit from 1901 or 1920. Anyway, from one of these
Are
old
those
books.
the handy recipes?
I think it was from the Handy Hints.
Sorry.
It was from one of these two books. I don't remember. If it's already come out, you already know. And it was just, this is essentially the cream biscuit with fruit in it. That's all it is. I mean, it's that simple. There's no egg. There's no real flavoring to it other than the fruit. And another video, I don't know if it's come out yet or if it's about to come out, it was that brown butter cake that we had.
Oh. That was really good. Way too big for the two of us to eat. Took us a
Yes.
long time to get through it. It actually surprisingly lasted really long.
Well, and here's
Stayed really good for quite a few days.
for quite a few days, but here's also one of the reasons why. This is the antithesis of that other cake.
Aha.
Completely the antithesis of the other cake. The other cake lasted so long too because we started to realize we only could eat a tiny sliver. You'd take the first couple of bites and be like, this is the most amazing thing I've ever eaten. And by the time you get to the last bite, it's like, I can't shove that in my mouth, but I have to because I don't want to waste it. And also it tastes so good.
It was
But
just so sweet.
it's so
was lovely.
sweet and
Yeah.
so much flavor. This is very light and easy and has the right amount of
No,
flavor.
mine's gone, so I mean, I like it.
I know.
But you know, you could do a little. Yeah, there's. I don't know.
I don't know that I think if I did anything to change that, I would add maybe some lemon flavoring or orange flavoring.
Orange would be good.
Yeah.
I was thinking cinnamon, but I think orange would be actually a better
Yeah.
choice.
Yeah, like an
Doesn't
orange
really need
like
a
an
bit.
orange extract, I think would be really good with this. But it's great the way it is. So, if you live in England, tell us about the Rough Robin cake. I've never heard of that before. It's really good. Thanks for stopping by. See you again soon.